Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the Bonus Points podcast. I'm your host Joe Garrett, as always being joined by Ollie Guy.
Hello, hello.
Hello Ollie, and today we are also joined by a very special guest, the chairman of 4J Studios, who you may have heard of because they made a game, the console editions of Minecraft, a game that I have played for, I don't know, I don't even want to think of how long I've played that game for, a lot of time, so as well as many other things. Welcome to the show, Chris Vanderkool.
Good evening, great to be here.
Yeah, welcome. Thank you so much. So we obviously, I met you kind of through 4J, and then through that we have got to do like a bunch of really cool things over the years and collaborate on quite a wide variety of different things. Like we've been on stage at Minecon, we've done all sorts, and so I guess adding the podcast to that list, I suppose.
No, excellent. So it's always great to do a show with you. I've never had a bad show with you, so I'm sure this one isn't going to change that.
There's always time. There's always time. Well, it's just because every time I end up doing anything with 4J, it normally ends up with Chris and I either in a restaurant or a pub, or sometimes a wine bar, a particular wine bar in Dundee, and just chatting about video games all night. So I'm like, if I can capture a bit of that essence in this podcast, then that would be great. That's my plan.
Excellent.
And the game that we're going to be doing, which is of course chosen by Chris, is Elite for the BBC Micro. So this is a game that probably out of all of the games we've done, there's a good chance a lot of people may not have heard of it before this podcast. So Ollie, do you want to kind of set us up with a brief summary of what this game is?
Yes, indeed. And I'm eager to hear Chris's background with this game as well, because this has certainly been a black spot, I think, for both of us, me and Joe. So the Wikipedia entry is as follows. Elite is a space trading video game. It was written and developed by David Braben and Ian Bell, and originally published by Acorn Soft for the BBC Micro and Acorn Electron computers in September 1984. Elite's open-ended game model and revolutionary 3D graphics led to it being ported to virtually every contemporary home computer system and earned it a place as a classic and a genre maker in gaming history. The game's title derives from one of the players' goals of raising their combat rating to the exalted heights of Elite. And there we go.
Okay, let's pass it over to you then, Chris. So, I mean, I don't want to age you, but like, when did you first encounter this game?
Well, I don't mind being aged at all. I was 14 or 15 when this came out, and it was like, you look at it now. Obviously, when we look at really retro games, it's kind of laughable. We thought things were cutting edge when you compare them to anything you look at now. But this was like true 3D graphics on the tiny little 32K BBC Micro that we're playing on, and they even did something technically really clever to get like 4 colours on the screen at once with all this going on, and it was monumental. I mean, it was everything you'd want in a game. There was a bit of intellect in terms of space trading, that kind of long-term trading aspect, which is kind of what they borrowed from in a way, but they added that on top of space combat, and with a nod to what would come in later in my life, it's pretty much completely procedurally generated, a la another game that we're all pretty familiar with. So those things, to me, made it something where you could lose yourself for days in Elite. You could build your own stories on top of the story that was kind of loosely there. And it was a game that, I was thousands of hours into it in the first times that I played it. And it definitely, when you ask me, Joe, what do I think is the best game of all time, and what's my favourite game? It's the usual thing. How do you pick your favourite child? Games is a humongous part of my life. But then when I thought about it more and more, I was like, no, it has to be Elite. Elite absolutely changed my view on what games could be.
And what is your favourite child?
Well,
you talk about how kind of revolutionary this game is. So obviously it came out in 1984. For those watching the video version, they'll be seeing footage of it. It is the video footage is of the NES version. We'll kind of talk a little bit more why that's the version the footage is for. But just to kind of set the scene, could you kind of compare it to some other games that were out at the time? Like what was like a normal experience playing a game on the BBC Micro compared to Elite?
Well, I mean, I think David and Ian, the developers, they first pitched this to a publisher called Thorn EMI, and it got rejected because they said it's too complicated. If you come back and make it 3 lives and the maximum gameplay is 2 minutes, we'll think about accepting it. So that kind of gives you an idea of the idea of what a video game or a computer game should be at the time. It was like what was working in the arcade, Space Invaders or Asteroids, things like that. So that's what should be on a computer game. But these guys were part of a new generation who are saying, no, we can take some of the cool things that have been in board games or role-playing games and we can bring them into, because there's no reason to have a coin in the slot. You don't only have 5 minutes to play and then you're out the arcade. You could play this forever. So compared to those kind of those great platformers, there was a game called Chucky Egg that was fantastically good. Jet Set Willy, a lot of these games that were on ZX Spectrum were being that was contemporary to the BBC at the time. For those that don't know, in the UK, the BBC was the school computer. Every school in Britain had BBCs to teach kids how to program, and as the name might suggest, the BBC themselves had TV shows to teach you how to program using this computer. And that was kind of seen as the more serious one, but it was still a great games machine. And as like David and Ian showed, it could do something that at first you couldn't do on any other machine, like real-time 3D space trading. It was phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal.
Did you play it in school, or did you have a BBC Micro at home?
Well, here's the secret.
Or both.
Well, no. I was lucky enough, and I don't know if you know this little tidbit about us, but my co-founder Paddy Burns and I, we met when we were 11 in our first day at high school, and one of the things that bonded us as best friends from then to now is that our dads were both teachers. His dad was the head of music, and my dad was the head of computing. So one of the benefits of having a dad who was a teacher is they could bring the school computer home on a Friday night. So gaming for me was like 3:30 on a Friday till 8:30 on a Monday morning, with no breaks.
Nice.
Yeah, can relate to that.
Funnily enough, me and Joe also met on the first day of high school, and we were probably both 11 as well.
Wow. Spooky and spookier.
My primary school actually had an Acorn computer, and I didn't realise until I was looking into this I was like, oh my god, I haven't thought about that for 25 years or something.
Yeah, and that was the junior version of the BBC. I mean, it was the Acorn Electron was pretty much the same machine with a couple of. In fact, I think here's another fact about Elite. On the BBC, it's in massive 4 colours. The Electron couldn't support that chipset, so it was only black and white. So that was the difference there. But I don't know as well if you know that company, Acorn Computers, that made the BBC, ultimately went on to become ARM, which is probably one of Britain's most successful technology companies of all time. And every chip in every phone in the world is pretty much designed by ARM these days. Huge company, and it goes straight from that first day in Cambridge of Acorn Computers all the way through to today. So we've got a lot to be thankful for those guys.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's
cool.
Crazy.
I didn't know that.
I didn't know either.
I want to pause to you, Ollie, because obviously, Chris, you are coming in, this is obviously a revolutionary game and you're coming in with a lot of nostalgia. We were coming in fresh. This is our first time taking to the skies in Elite. And so Ollie and I, we don't talk to each other about the game while we're playing it. So we don't know what each other thought of it. So I'm eager to find out, what was your first voyage in Elite like, Ollie?
So for the first time ever doing this show, at 51 episodes, Joe rang me and warned me about Elite before I started playing and said, move over to the NES version. Like, the BBC Micro version, it's too complicated. The NES version that uses these buttons, this is how you do it. He showed me, took a share screen, and was like, he didn't give me any opinions or anything. He was very good, very diplomatic. But he was like, you click this to start, you hold down select to start the game, told me how to do it. My first voyage into space was not that different from my last voyage into space. I think I did about 25 runs. And the initial 7 light year ring, I never managed to get beyond the 7 light year ring because I would kind of fly out. I understood the game. Like I watched a lot of documentaries about it. I watched people playing it. I watched a great channel called Retro Recipes. I watched them play it. So I got it. But it was dogfighting was really taking me out. So I would tend to fly to one. I think my first ever run as I flew to another planet and I was killed by about 3 ships in about 3 seconds. But then beyond that, I mean, also my final run also wasn't far off that either. But that's been my trips to space have been quite rough, I think.
So you did you go? But you went back and played it again, right? Chris, on the emulated version?
On the BBC emulated version, yeah.
Okay,
hardcore.
so how did you how did you find it kind of going back to it now? Was it as you expected? Was there anything that surprised you as like, oh, this is better than I thought, or this is different to how I remembered it?
Well, one of the things you did for me and making me kind of think about this and pick this game, and then when I opened it, so there's a BBC in-browser emulator, it was a proper time machine for me. It popped up, and the first thing that freaked me out was it was the Micro Vitec Cub monitor inside the browser, which is the screen that everybody had. So it was like, oh my God, I'm straight back there. And then I started it up, and the disk drive sound was there, and they'd sampled the disk drive sound. So I was like, whoa, I've just gone back in time almost 40 years. I even had to go, and at that point I had to go into Spotify and play the piece of music that I always played when I was playing Elite.
Nice.
What
was the music? We got to know. You got to say.
So I remember I bought this single. It was a band called The Colour Field. I had this song called Thinking of You, and I got a 12-inch single, which again, for those under the age of about 30, is a weird concept. And I think I remember one Elite session where I played this song 40 times. I just kept playing the same song every time it finished, leaned over the record player and kind of went again. So that was me. I was straight back there. But then I also had to bring up what's the key mapping, and just remind myself where that is again. But it took me all of about 10 minutes, and I was right back at the start. And weird things. I mean, things, Ollie, that you'll have found, I'm assuming, challenging, like docking in the space station. Did you get as far as that? Yeah.
Yes.
So one of the things in this game is, until you've got significantly far on, there's no automated docking. You have to put the ship through a tiny little letterbox slot that's rotating in space at a weird angle. So you have to learn to fly on the planet, because the space station always faces the planet. So you fly low over the planet, and then when it's above your head, turn round, look up, and then match your rotation to it. That in itself is a bit of a nightmare of a thing to have to do. But it came back, like nearly 40 years later. Bush, I was there, I was matching it, I was in. And I started remembering my kind of trading patterns that I used to do. I mean, I used to have books that I wrote the price of, the price of textiles in one system, and, where they were, and do loads of jumps. All that came back. But the combat, you're dead right. You have to, I don't know if you worked this out, but you have to look at the government of a planet, and you don't want to be going to any of the tough governments to start with. You want to be going to
avoid the anarchist planets early on.
I was like, I played quite a lot. Like, I did like 25 runs. Like, I did get the hang of it. It didn't get any easier, but like I got it, like the one thing with the governments is I couldn't always figure out if they were bad. Like corporate, I was like, is corporate bad, or are they just uptight? Like, I don't know if they're going to start shooting at me or not. There was like dictatorship, which I just stayed away from. Anarchy, just stay away from them.
Yeah.
But the on the NES version, you have the docking computer from the start. I had to do it manually once, because I accidentally spent all my money, because you have to pay 5 credits to use it. So, but it plays.
That's Nintendo. That's Nintendo being kind as Nintendo are to the players.
Yeah. So it might be worth kind of talking about the differences. So so we played. So we both played the NES version. So I did play the BBC Micro version, but I realised that I was going to spend as much time learning the controls of the game as I was playing it and learning what the game was. And I was like, I've only got a certain amount of time to play. I looked up the manual. It's 65 pages long, the manual for the BBC Micro version. And I spent hours going through it. And then in the end, looking through the website by Ian Bell, one of the creators, at the very front, he recommends, if you're playing this game, play the NES one. And when I saw that, I was like, you know what? It's fine. If he says I can, then I can. And it simplifies the controls in terms of the actual main part of the game, apart from a few small things like the docking. It is essentially the same game, though. Like, once you kind of actually get into it. And I actually watched kind of a video kind of breaking down the development on the NES. And apparently it's kind of the most impressive version that they got it running. And you might be able to talk a little bit more about this, Chris, just because of the way that the NES works, the way it's kind of drawing from the memory and normally just sprites in tiles, and this game is all lines and with almost infinite amounts of combinations with the stars, all of the trickery that was involved to create this, and they had to add extra RAM into the cartridge and stuff. So that's the reason why we ended up doing the NES version. And for anyone interested in playing it, unless you are kind of going back to reminisce on the BBC Micro, like that is the easiest way to get into just playing and seeing what the game is, I reckon.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right. I mean, it was one of those things that my fingers kind of immediately found their way home. You know, I hadn't played it for decades, and it was there. And I also remembered, you know, the feel of it as well. So you're obviously navigating completely in 3D in space, and for all of us that have played any kind of 3D space game, that's a pretty difficult thing to do, you know. And this has got quite one of the early heads-up display HUDs that are very clever at showing you your position in space. But, you know, 1,000 hours into it, it was me back at home, and it feels easy to me. But I'm sure you're absolutely right, and I'm sure I'd go ahead with you, and I don't look down on any of you who don't play the full hardcore BBC experience.
Thank you. I will say though, the UI for like telling your position relative to planets and other ships, it's actually really good. Considering it's running on a NES, and you can see like, oh, these ships are above me and behind me, and then as you're moving, you can see them like kind of spinning on the radar. I was very impressed. Even the little thing that shows you how lined up you are to the planet. So there's like a small radar on the side. Even that one has like 2 icons that show you if the planet's like above or like behind you. So as you're rotating, it's like, oh, I can actually see. And it was surprisingly easy to move in 3D space. As long as you weren't getting blown up, it was quite easy to move around in 3D space on the NES.
I think in so many things like that, one of the reasons I picked it, you know, when I was thinking about, because I think it's perfectly balanced as well. You know, those user interface cues work brilliantly. You're right, you're never lost. That secondary compass that shows you the planet, or if you're close to the planet, shows you where the space station is. You know, once you understand that, you're just not going to get lost in this game, which is really important. But even, you know, the BBC version, it's in 32K. The AI algorithms that they've got, when you're dogfighting with the ships, there's 3 or 4 different behaviours. You know, the lesser ships will chicken run, right? You know, they'll come at you and fire at you, and then you get one shot on them, and suddenly they're away, and you've got them. And then the big guys will, you know, far more aggressive in the way that they do it. Now, you know, as a game developer, I know what they've got to play with in this thing, and it's next to nothing. So these can't be complicated. I said the word AI. There's no AI here. It's a bit of a few rules as to what they do, but it's completely convincing. You know, I can sit and have a dogfight for ages, and it feels to me like there's someone else in the other ship. You know, it's not like, oh, this is so predictable, I know exactly what the ship's going to do this time, so it's pretty boring. I just need to always fire ahead, you know, whatever way to beat it. It's not predictable in that way, and it's you know, so it's one of those great games. To me, an amazing game suspends disbelief. You know, you lose yourself in the game. A 4-color game, super low resolution. I'm convinced I'm a space trader, and I'm caring about the planet, and I'm reading the little bio for the planet, and I'm like, oh, I wonder if I can do a deal with this guy and not do it. It's brilliant. It's what games should be, whether they're written on a bit of paper or running on a PS5.
Yeah. One of the things I always think of is, and like from the age we are, we kind of have it as well, is where back in the day you used to use your imagination a lot more with games than you do now. Like I even think about me kind of playing like the Game Boy, like Pokemon games. And like what's going on the screen compared to on my head, or what I'm telling my friends at school is like, oh, I went into a shop, but then I came out and then there was this thing. Like what was actually on the screen is a very different story to what actually happens. And I think with modern games, you know, when they're in 4K and you know, there's reflectiveness on their eyeballs and stuff. Like there's not much room for imagination because, you know, they just kind of begin to look like films. And I think, to be fair, Minecraft is kind of one of the games that kind of still has that a little bit with the simplistic graphics. And I did kind of get to a point where I wasn't just thinking of this game as I wasn't just thinking of it in terms of efficiency, in terms of making money. I was thinking about like you'd get the radar screen and you'd be like looking at like the different planets you could go to, and there'd always be like a little like humorous description. It'd be like, this planet has like 0G cricket, and I was like, oh, I'm gonna go to that planet because that planet sounds funny. And even though I know I'm gonna get there, and in reality it's the same as all the other planets, and it's just gonna be a list of items I could buy. Like it's got just enough personality, and then it's the presentation's just enough to kind of set you on your way, and then your brain can fill in the gaps.
Totally. I think the other thing they do brilliantly, and I mean, I've not heard from you, Joe, how far you got, but I didn't have enough time to get this far in the game this time playing through, and Ollie hasn't. But when you start to earn the rewards of the really huge upgrades, when you got these, you can afford something, and you can't get it all at once. It will take you a long time to get them. It really changes the game again. So when you get the scoops and you can start skimming the sun's surface and harvesting things, or, I don't know if you saw it in a dogfight, sometimes they'll throw off cargo. Eventually, if you've got the right upgrade, you can pick that cargo up.
So I shot one down and I saw the card's basically like a box in the air, and I was like, oh, it's dropped something, I can pick it up. And I just crashed into it. So I was like, okay, I guess that's more realistic. I didn't have the right tool, apparently.
Yep. And so that progression, I think, and again, that all they really had was earn more money, buy this thing, and we'll unlock a pretty simple feature because we're not really changing the game very much, but massive replay value. And it was like, oh, okay. And that, the name of the game is Elite, and you start off as harmless. Elite is the ultimate status, and you got to play for a long, long, long time before you'll go all the way through to Elite. So it's pretty cool.
I was going to say, I managed to rank all the way up to mostly harmless, which I'm pretty sure is a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy reference. And that was from in one, like, I played more overall, but in one session, playing about 2.5 hours, I went up, which I'm assuming I went up one notch. I doubt they could slip another rank in between them.
No.
Do you know how many ships you have to shoot down to get Elite rank?
Do you know what? I don't. I think is it a number of ships?
It is a number of ships. I can tell you because I looked it up. It's over 6,000 ships you need to shoot down. And the first person, so basically when the game originally came out, obviously, Chris, I'm sure you already know this, it came with like a postcard, and you could send proof that you were Elite status to the developers, and they would send you a badge or something. And apparently it took 5 weeks for the first player to send in their proof that they hit Elite status, which is crazy.
Because you'll see it, I'm assuming it's on the NES version as well. You'll see when you save the game, it gives you a competition number. And that number basically is like a reverse seed of your save game. So if you send that number to them, they could tell exactly what you had money-wise, status, everything.
Yeah, I think the NES, because they all had slight differences. So, like, I don't think we had that. The NES version didn't have that competition number. It did have a picture of your pilot, and he would, like, change depending on your status and your rank and stuff like that. So, like, if you blew up some police ships, he would get, like, sunglasses. Or, like,
that's
if you...
fancy.
yeah. Or if he was, like, I think when he's mostly harmless, like Joe said, he's the same guy, but he's just got, like, a bit of a frown. So like that was quite cool, like going back and seeing like how he changed.
It's like Fable when they were trying to do like if you're going good or bad, you grow horns. It's like an early version of that.
So the other, I mean, there's some good stories about Elite because they were clever and they did it procedurally. They kind of knew they could make the game bigger and bigger and bigger, but the publisher was like, no, it's too big and it's kind of too mathematical because it was something to the power of something is what they wanted to do. So it's an 8-bit machine, so they're like, okay, 8 galaxies, 256, which is bits in a byte. So 256 planets and 8 galaxies. That's what we're going to have. And because of the procedural generation, they're like, oh, we're going to need to check every name. There could be something really bad in here. And sure enough, they found a planet called Arse.
Yeah.
So they manually removed Arse, which I think was a bit... Yeah, that's a bit sad, really. They should have kept Arse in the game.
Yeah, I mean, watching all these documentaries about it, there was something that, like, I don't know if you guys have experienced this as well, but sometimes when I see stuff on TV, I'm like, instantly can tell, oh, that was made in England, or like, that was made in Britain. I can just, something about it, I can tell.
Yeah.
having arse in the game is like exactly that. Like they could have left it in.
Well, one of the kind of, I guess, with censoring is so you can trade like materials and computers and things, but there's also some like illicit material. You could like trade firearms, and then in the BBC Micro version you could trade slaves, but in the NES version you trade robot slaves, and I'm not entirely sure what the difference between a robot slave and a robot is, but that's the way they censored it for the NES.
Also, I think like alcohol or like basically some sort of alcohol became like beverage or like soft. They basically changed the name of it so it wasn't explicitly booze.
Of course, because there's also narcotics in the BBC version. I'm sure Nintendo didn't allow narcotics in the NES.
Yeah, probably not. I can't remember what they changed it to, because I played using a guide. So I had a guide open of the average price for everything, but that was from the BBC Micro version. But obviously, it still worked on the NES version. So, but yeah, the robot slaves. Do you know what? That might have tripped me up, because I seem to remember looking at the planet species, the industrial and like agriculture, and being like, oh yeah, agriculture, like they won't have robot slaves, but I guess if they've been programmed to be regular slaves, they just changed the name, like maybe like, that's why they weren't worth very much, because I'd take them to the planets, they'd be worth like 2 credits, and I'd be like, I bought them for 16. Like,
you buy them from a tech planet thinking you're going to sell them to an agricultural planet.
Exactly, like, yeah.
They're clogging up the cockpit. I can't move for all these robot slaves. You're like Del Boy. It's like I've got to ship them somehow. Like I've got to get rid of this cargo of robot slaves in the back.
I think. I mean, there's lots of other bits, like the fact that they actually went, and as you probably know, I think a good chunk of that 65-page manual was story. They actually started to build.
There was like a book, like a small book that came originally with so they had that manual, which did have a lot of flavor text kind of setting up the world, as a lot of kind of manuals did back in the day. But then there was an actual, I guess I won't say novel, but like like a small story that isn't like directly related to the gameplay, but just something to kind of set the world, just to kind of give you an idea of what the place is that you're going to be spending your time in the game.
Yeah, and from that point of view, I mean, we're talking super geeky, but ultimately, when you look at EVE Online today, I mean, EVE Online is the absolute, in an MMO world, the natural successor to this, and dare I say it, Starfield, and No Man's Sky, these kind of, I mean, No Man's Sky in a way is probably one of the purest, successors to Elite that I ever saw. And when that was announced and when I saw it was coming on, I got incredibly excited about that. And interestingly, I think now No Man's Sky, with the beauty of sort of games as a service and continual updates, it eventually fulfilled the promise. I mean, No Man's Sky version that's out there in the world now, I love. And it gives me vibes of Elite. When it came out, not so much. And I think one of the brilliant things, again, and why I would pick this game time after time, is these, and not just David and Ian, but the producers and the testers that they worked with, they tuned this game absolutely brilliantly. I mean, of course, there's always little loopholes and things that you find out, and you might find a brilliant trading partnership at some point, but none of it ever spoiled the game. The game was, it was tough, but still brilliant. Did the NES version? Sorry, Joe. I was just going to ask you. Did the NES version only allow you to save in the way the BBC does, which is every time you get to a planet and dock safely, you can save?
Yes, but I was playing an emulated version of it, so I was also doing save states. So, the NES version, it would still be, there's no kind of checkpoints or kind of auto saving or anything. You'd save at the planet, your kind of log kind of your mission, I suppose. But I was not doing that. I did it first. Sorry, I'm mostly harmless. I promise. I'm mostly harmless. It's actually funny you referencing Starfield. So I did laugh to myself a bit. Me and Ollie always joke about that we kind of make anti-content, like we make the least desirable content on YouTube that people would click on. And just the fact that this is the year that Starfield came out and we're all gathering around to talk about Elite just really made me happy, because it really fits in our vibe here at the bonus points.
And it's, I mean, it is that thing. I mean, I've really enjoyed watching a lot of your episodes, and it's interesting to hear what people see as the best or their favourite, and and it was so difficult. I mean, you were pinging back and forwards. And I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to pick. I could pick. There's so many things. Like, obviously, I can't pick Minecraft. It's too, it's too obvious. And stuff that's too contemporary. I'm not sure. I don't want to pick something retro just to be the same. And then it suddenly hit me. It was like, look, probably I've spent more hours playing this game than I think almost anything else.
So just curious on the BBC Micro, from what I've heard from the documentaries, was like it wasn't really like made for playing games.
No.
So what were you doing with it when you weren't playing Elite?
So I was pretty fortunate, because I started programming when I was like 10 or 11 and just having a bit of fun with computers, and then people started buying these machines from there was all these computer shops that popped up, and PC wasn't even a thing really back then. Eventually, that was seen as like a expensive business machine. So these machines, little businesses were buying them, and the shops would kind of go, "Oh yeah, you can use this and use it to do stock control or do your accounts." And they're like, "Amazing! How do I do that?" "Oh, you have to write a program to do that." "How do I write a program?" "Well, I don't know, but I know this 15-year-old kid." So I got all these jobs writing like booking systems for hairdressers and all sorts of stuff like that. So I had the BBC doing tons of stuff like that, and then in our spare time we just play games non-stop.
Nice. So was it also I've basically, this game had 17 ports, so I've seen a lot of very old versions of this game. Was the BBC Micro one that came on a tape as well?
Yeah. So there was a tape version of Elite, but there was also a disc version. There was a 5 1/4-inch disc version as well. And pretty cool. Not that many people used tape with the BBC. Mostly again because of school machines. The disc drive came along. The Electron was different though. Most people started off life with an Electron with a tape drive. Commodore, Electron and the Commodore 64 were kind of pretty similar. And then you had the Spectrum that was every person's computer.
I see.
I think Joe knows this story, but the Spectrum was actually manufactured in Dundee, where we all live, and because of that, once that became 84, 85, just about the same time, it was in full production. Everywhere else in the UK, it was like 150, 200 quid for a Spectrum. In Dundee, you could get one for 10 quid and a packet of cigarettes from the guy at the back of the factory. So everybody in Dundee had Spectrums with like chain tapes. So so one of the reasons the games industry is so big in Dundee is because the Spectrum was made here.
Oh wow, that's amazing. The just quickly on the price, because you touched on that. I was looking at one of the documentaries. The guy was going through all the different versions of Elite, and he was like, "Oh, this is like the mega gold, like." So I had like multiple versions. Like a game today would have deluxe, and like the super mega version was £17. And he was like, "Oh, that's an expensive one." Like it's like, oh, normally £12 at a push.
That would be expensive back in the day, like £17.
I know, it's crazy.
If you go £17 index linked to inflation, like 40 years ago, that's probably not far off the price of a AAA game now. I would have thought 50, 60 quid. Yeah, they were not cheap.
So what was the different versions, Ollie? Like, was it like different content in the game?
No, it just came with more. Well, there was the disc version Chris mentioned, and also it came with like one came with the book, and there was like one came with like a badge or something. Like it just came with like it would do today. Yeah. This was like an unbelievable marketing push. It was like the biggest UK game ever. Yeah, and they were like, "Yeah, our marketing budget was £50,000," and because I work in marketing now. So I was like, "Oh my god, that's nothing!" Like it's like a minuscule amount of money.
Massive. But that bought them. They've had TV and everything out of that. They ran TV ads for it, which was again unheard of. And I think we all aspired to this once we got in the industry. They had the launch party at Thorpe Park.
Yes.
So that's pretty cool.
That's great.
So I saw that it took like about 2 years to develop the game. Which I know that doesn't seem like a long time, compared to a AAA game today. But whenever you're kind of hearing about games from the era, it's like, oh, it was made by one person in 3 months and it's become this legendary game. Like, is that an exceptionally long development time for a BBC Micro game?
Yeah, and these guys, I mean, David Braben, I mean, David's still at Frontier today. and has done exceptionally well. I mean, David and Ian were at college together in Cambridge. I think they were either postgrad or so they were clever cookies, who really could code. And they had to build. They built a full 3D engine in machine code on the BBC, which was never meant to do what they had it doing. I mean, that's why we were mind blown when this thing came out. We're like, wait a minute. I mean, you mentioned it earlier, Joe. The equivalent games were like little jumpy sprite games that were much poorer than the equivalent games on NES at the time, but similar type of things. And then suddenly these dudes bring out full space trading, procedurally generated worlds. And they did. I pretty certainly had space combat, the procedural generated stuff, and then they added the trading in later. So that whole side, although in some ways it's like a database and a bit of a spreadsheet, it's not that complex. You would think squeezing that into what they managed to do and putting it out bug free, it's insane what they managed to do, and not surprising. I think that it took that long to get it right.
Yeah, but it seems so. It seems so core for the. I mean, obviously the trading, like in my mind, is kind of one of the main things. But it works well with the combat because it adds stakes to the combat, because you're upgrading your ship, or you've got your cargo of robot slaves that you've just spent all your credits on. It means it's devastating when you do get shot down, because that's ending your progress. So the thought of the game not having that in, it just feels like it just wouldn't work. Like that, it feels not essential.
Chance. Yeah. I mean, you're right. I did one of my first trips back. This, when I've been playing it for this, I was like got through a pretty tough tech planet. I defeated 3 or 4 dogfights. I was right at the edge. My shields were right down to next to nothing. I thought I'm going to die. I didn't die. I lined up perfectly, and I went in and I went through the slot. And a lot of the time, you would never get it perfect, so it always scraped the side. So you get, my shields are damaged. I was like, I'm fine though, I've got enough. And then it lost all my cargo. It destroyed my bloody cargo going back into the slot. It's like, And at first, how often does that kind of thing... Because it was punishment, but it was reasonable punishment. And it was like, damn it, I'm going to have to go back in and hope that I'm going to get through dogfights again and do this jump again. I think, again, in game design today, it's what you said, there's not enough at stake, so you don't really care, so it's easy and you get a bit bored pretty quickly.
Also, the small things like you saying, banging your wing on the docking station, like they become big events in like your story that you're doing. So like, I managed to space jump out of a dogfight, because when you start doing it, the counter starts going down, and I was like, oh my god, and I managed to jump out, and I was literally like, I feel like I'm piloting a ship, but like this is like a NES game, like 4 colors, like nothing to it, and I was like, oh my god, I actually managed to pull this off, like this crazy maneuver. I mean, to be fair, I jumped back to the planet I originally came from, and I had to spend all of my money on getting the 7 light years of fuel back, but I still managed to get back, so I was still pretty happy with that.
I mean, even that's the other thing I think that they balance brilliantly is the missiles. Right, so the missiles are great. And I don't know if it's the same in the NES, but they cost 30 credits. And very rarely do you get more than 30 credits for the ship that you blow up. So, there's a net, you might get 20 credits. So, damn, I'm 10 credits down. I used the missile, so I'm going to try not to use my missiles. The alternative at times is, right, I'm going to die if I don't use my missiles, so I don't care if I'm losing money. Damn it, even with the trade I've done, I'm down on this journey, and there's good balance and consequences and all of that. I mean, they've got that down to. I think they've just got it perfect. They got it
also with
perfect.
The missiles, as I was amazed, is so the first time, well, maybe not the first time, but one of the early times I fired one, and you physically see the little missile going out, and I was like, well, I'm going to shoot them with my laser while the missile's going in case the missile doesn't hit them, and I blew up my own missile, and I was like, that's cool. I didn't know that I could blow up my own missile. I was surprised that worked, because I kind of assumed that it's doing a visual thing, but it's worked out whether it's going to hit them or not. But it seemed like like it was actually tracking them, and it was a, inverted commas, physical object, moving through space. And that just technically impressed me.
Yeah, and you're right. So again, and this is like geeky game developer part of me, some of that collision detection is really amazing because, you've got a big open space with it. But also, they do things like hidden object removal. So it's a standard thing we do in 3D games and always have done is if something hides something, you remove it and you don't draw it, so you can you get an increase in performance. These guys were doing that in 1984, and they either worked out how to do it themselves completely, or they were borrowing from like mega advanced research that was probably being used to simulate the space shuttle or do flight simulation. Because effectively that's what it is. It's a flight sim engine in a BBC Micro. And I'm sure at the time, the people that were making the equivalent flight sims for Tornado jets or whatever they were trying to put together, their minds would be absolutely melted by the fact that two kids from Cambridge on a 32K BBC had probably done a better job than they had. I mean, it was that good. I mean, just incredible.
Do you think that this was the first 3D game?
No, it definitely wasn't. I mean, I'd have to go back and check what came before it, but there were 3D games. Obviously, in the arcade, there was a few really cool games that used a vector graphics engine. So this is like polygons that we're used to seeing today. They're having to do that all, and again, 3D hardware acceleration. I don't think so. I mean, this was all done at the most basic level. Over in the world of arcades, I mean, you had things like these vector machines. So the Star Wars game was done with vectors. There was I think was it called Battle Zone tank game, and they were true 3D and pretty cool. And there was some games that were starting to bring these techniques in. So there were techniques that were known. They didn't invent the techniques, but I think they were the first people to put them into the hands of kids at home. That's for sure.
Yeah, I was basically looking at it, and I'm wondering if, the round radar at the bottom?
Yeah.
I was wondering if they're basically somehow using that data to put where the ships are. Because, like, the 3D space could not exist in a way it does today. Like, how we have a game engine now and you have a 3D, you make a plane. Like, that could not exist. So I was wondering if they were just using the data of the radar to be like, okay, it's this far away, it's this high up. Here's the player, so I guess we'll just do a little dot here. If that was the way around, or
no? I mean, and this is me guessing. I'm not going to look at the code nor ask them, but what I think they were doing is within a radius of and not just a 3-dimensional radius. So within a sphere of the player, objects existed and they were persistent. They were there. I think if they got a certain distance away, they either removed them completely or made it a kind of rough, hey, there's something over in that direction. So they've used all sorts of pretty interesting cheats like that. The other thing, because if you think about how little they had in terms of graphics, incredibly clever the way they did background stars that were definitely in the background, and then the planets, they rotate, and it's if there's nothing but a circle, then you can never tell it's rotating. So they always had a bit of detail, like a circle within a circle. So your brain kind of said, "Oh, okay, that's moving," and you kind of need it to do that, because otherwise you don't have a point of reference to know, where I'm flying. You've just got nothing but a circle. It wouldn't convince you. Whereas your brain there's enough in there that it does convince your brain you're flying about in a galaxy. It's crazy.
Yeah, and just setting it in space is like, it doesn't make it easy, but that is probably one of the easiest settings to do it, because the space is just blackness. If they were doing a fantasy game and you were a dragon flying over a landscape, it could be done, and they're using lines to draw a tree, but it wouldn't be convincing. But whereas if you're looking at blackness and a few coloured dots, it's like, that's what the sky actually looks like, and it allows them to make it much more convincing without actually needing that many graphics on screen.
Well, and the thing that surprised me was I've got a room full of retro consoles, and and I love kind of going back in my gaming history and playing things, and more often than not, nostalgia is not quite what it once was. You go back to these things and go, "Oh, I thought this was much better." Oh my goodness, my memory is definitely playing tricks with me, or actually generally, and even stuff like some Xbox 360 stuff that I play, go, "Oh, that was a bit rough," and I never thought it was rough at the time. I didn't feel that playing Elite. I kind of went back, but okay, it's a 4-color BBC screen, it's super low resolution, but it didn't detract from the gameplay experience. I mean, that was the weird thing for me. You could have given me that same game with full RTX accelerated graphics and every shader on the planet. I probably wouldn't be having any more fun with that game than I was with the BBC emulation.
Did you ever reach Elite? Did you ever get Elite rank?
I did reach Elite.
Did you send in your code, your proof?
No, I didn't. And it took me. It was probably 2 or 3 years of in and out, not playing it all the time. But I was not dedicated to 5 weeks of.
So that's obviously one save. How protective are you over anyone? like I guess no one else can play Elite on your your BBC Micro.
Well, you could rename them. Like you could rename the saves. So you could set one up and you definitely back them up. Like you cut an extra disc.
You rename the character, right? Don't you? Isn't that the way? Which is always weird. 'Cause I'm like, well, I'm the same person. Like,
you'd have 20 million versions of yourself.
Yeah, like Bob 1, Bob 2, Bob 3. Like.
How did the BBC Micro even save? Like, because the tape. So I've just learned about this tape thing, so that's why I'm into this. Where I heard someone actually playing the tape, and it just sounds like it's basically doing ones and zeros and listening to them. So and I understand a hard drive works by flipping things up or horizontally. So how did the BBC Micro actually save your data?
So the tape version, if you had that, but let's say that was most people didn't. You're talking about. I don't. Have you ever seen a 5 1/4 inch floppy disk?
Yeah, a smaller one I have. Yeah, we used to have those. Yeah.
So you had 3.5 inch ones, which were hard plastic with a bit of a slot across it, but inside that is a bit of floppy plastic. So the bigger ones were just rather than hard cases, they had softer cases, so you could see it. So it's a magnetic disc, so it's like a single layer. So it's pretty much the same technique as you do on a hard disk, except it's much lower capacity, and it's one small piece of plastic disc that you could do it on, and they're reversible as well, some of them. So you could actually save on like a cassette tape. You could save it on either side.
Okay, so you're actually saving your data for your save on the floppy disk. It's not any memory on the micro.
No. It would the long term save data was on a disk. So you'd have normally you could actually have 2 disk drives. I think you could have up to 4 on a BBC, but you'd have the Elite program disk in one drive, and you could have your save games in another, and you could save it to the second drive.
So you could take the discs to someone else's house and be like, "Oh, here's my..."
Yeah.
And you could probably also copy your save file, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. And also, if you're writing it with a competition code, you could write I know what each number is, so I could give myself 1,000 credits. So you take. I mean, of course, we all went and tried to hack it, and they were. Braben and Bell were pretty. They were pretty advanced. They actually wrote copy protection onto their. Onto the way the disc worked on the BBC to try and defeat people just completely copying the disc. That probably worked for about 5 minutes. I see.
Some things have never changed.
No. Yeah, I think there's probably a recognition that this version, the original version, has had its time, and it's not. And it's. I mean, this isn't a commercially valuable thing, but. The idea and the concept of Elite and the brand, that's what Frontier have taken forward. Of course, you talk about anniversaries. I mean, we're in the vanguard here, guys, because it's going to be the 40th anniversary next year.
Yeah. God, we were ahead of the curve.
Exactly.
Also, did you just mention that one of them went on to make RollerCoaster Tycoon or Theme Park?
So I'll get which one.
So Bullfrog was Theme Park World.
Theme Park. Bullfrog's Theme Park. So it would be RollerCoaster. Well, RollerCoaster Tycoon was a Scottish guy who did it originally, but I think Frontier partnered with him to do the sequels.
Well, the fact that I had that I was
I had it in the chamber. RollerCoaster Tycoon.
I had it in the chamber is that RollerCoaster Tycoon was written in the same programming language as Elite. So I guess that makes sense.
So Chris Sawyer is the guy that did RollerCoaster Tycoon. He's an amazing guy in and of himself. I mean, he was one of the original, the OG early 1980s machine code programmers, and he's Scottish. He lives in outside Stirling, not far from me, and he did the first RollerCoaster Tycoon completely himself. This was, in the 90s, and I think Hasbro published it, went amazingly well. And then as they did bigger and bigger versions of it, it was like, you can't do that one guy. And I think he partnered up with David and Frontier, and they took the franchise on from Chris Sawyer. So yeah, it was RollerCoaster Tycoon they did, and then most recently they've done all the Jurassic games with Universal.
Oh, nice one.
Yeah, because I know Chris Sawyer, he kind of, after making whatever his final RollerCoaster Tycoon he worked on, he was kind of like, I'm done. That was the game that I always wanted to make, and I've made it now, and he just hasn't made a game since. Like, he was like, yep, that's exactly what I wanted to do, and just kind of walked away, which is quite rare for someone in his position, I suppose.
Yeah, and he's a remarkable guy. I remember, again, we shared an agent in the 90s, and she was this amazing lady called Jackie Lyons, pretty famous in the games industry. So she started off life as a literary agent. She was like Gene Roddenberry from Star Trek. She was his literary agent, and inevitably, kids were getting into developing games, so they needed somebody to help them, and she knew about publishing, so off she went. When we got involved with her, she'd been all these amazing developers like Chris Sawyer and David Braben she'd represented, so she looked after us. And I remember her one day saying to me, Chris, would you go and have a cup of coffee with Chris Sawyer? Because he's kind of on his own working, and I think he's a bit lonely. We had sort of, 50 people working in our studio at the time. We were one of these new generation of sort of larger developers. And I remember going to see him, and he just was literally worked at his kitchen table, and he showed me the first version of RollerCoaster Tycoon he'd done. He still worked 100% in assembly code, did it all himself, and it was absolutely, I was awestruck, right? Because I'm trying to wrangle all these different developers and building bigger and bigger teams, and here's this guy, and everybody thought, well, that's never going to work. He's never going to be able to do that himself. And he had his biggest ever hit. I think Hasbro published the original RollerCoaster Tycoon. He did it himself, and you're right, Joe. He just kind of went, yeah, I'll consult, and it's my IP, but somebody else needs to take this on because I can't be bothered with it anymore.
Yeah,
nice one. Shall we? Questions?
Oh. Yeah. Did anyone in the community load up Elite? Did we have anyone else take to the skies?
Muppets in the Discord and Mike in the Discord did, and they said it was very hard. We didn't have anyone writing in. They spoke to me personally and said it was very difficult. Blake in our community as well said they gave up after about 5 minutes. But Muppet in the Discord did have a good question for you though, Chris. Asked if you played and what you thought of Elite Dangerous.
Yeah, I did play it, and I think for me, I was going to always find it very difficult to enjoy a future Elite game, and I think they put a lot of work and effort, very good, into the simulation, and it was far more accurate space simulation, and it was like, yeah, it's not Elite to me. So yeah, didn't end up getting a lot of playtime from me because I thought it ended up being putting too much complexity and taking away my ability to really put my own story into my gameplay. Yeah,
that's weird. Like me and Joe, we did talk about that. We talked about it for about games that have interconnected universes, or like a Marvel Cinematic Universe. But one thing that came up is once you start showing people too much, you're showing them the edge. And your imagination doesn't fill in the gaps anymore. So that's kind of what's happening here. I can totally see that with this game.
Yeah.
Joe, this one's for you, mate. Are you ready?
Okay.
It's from Archie W on YouTube. Says, do you think this game still holds up, and would you recommend it to anyone interested in space trading and exploration games?
I think for the most part, yes, it does hold up. I think graphically, absolutely. For a mid-80s game, I think it looks as good as it possibly could. And as Chris was saying, it's balanced really well. There's a lot of ways. I always like to kind of not break games, but kind of poke at them and see could I exploit it. And I was like, oh wait, there's like an agricultural planet next to an industrial one. I can just keep going back and forth and sending them to each other the stuff that they don't have, and like, why even bother going? But the game thought about that, and you affect the market. If you sell them a bunch of food, when you come back, they've still got their food, so the prices don't line up. So things like that, I think, work really well. I think for someone that's come from a modern game, just the controls, I think, is going to be so much of a barrier, where there's so much focus testing and design in terms of like making sure there's no friction in like the first 15 minutes of a game, because that's when a lot of people will be dropping off. And I think this game was kind of looking at the bigger picture, and maybe David and Ian, the designers, they knew everything so intimately, and they were playtesting it, I'm sure, themselves, and they knew how it all worked. And I think there probably wasn't so much for kind of putting into the opening. So I think that will be a difficult point for people. So I think I would probably recommend it to people like us, who are just nerdy and interested in the history, and just say like, can you believe that this game is like in 1984 and you can fly from space like down onto the space station, and Starfield has to do a loading screen? Like, isn't that crazy? I'd recommend it to people like us, but for someone who's just wanting to play a space game for fun, I would probably say No Man's Sky is probably your first port that you dock on.
I would.
Go on,
sorry. I totally agree with everything you said there, but I think it's really interesting, and it's things change over time. At the time, you're talking about people who used to go into coin-op arcades, which were purposely ridiculously difficult as a learning curve to get you to keep feeding the slot, and spend the smallest amount of time possible. So for kids like me who were used to that, we got into this, and it was like, okay, there's a skill to be learned here, but I've got no limit. I can play this all night. Okay, let me get this right. Okay, I've got that skill in, and off I go. And it's not that I'm great because I do that, and kids today or people, well, it's terrible because you're handheld. I think you're right. I think there's a brilliant part of that we can design now, to whether it's through tutorial or whether it's through turning the difficulty dials in a dynamic way, we can ease people in. But on the other side of it, I'd encourage anybody to get stuck into something hard once every now and again, because it completely changes the value you put on a game when you master it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd say, like, if I was recommending this to someone, I would just say, you've got to play it on its terms. Don't try and play it like a modern game. Like, you need to do the research. You need to watch someone else play it. You need to do the research. You need to get a guide open. And then once you've done those things, like, you're right. Like, the game is fun and it does work. And it still looks, I mean, obviously it doesn't look, it's not 4K or anything, but like it still looks good. It's like you can still see what you're doing, and it's easy to read. The UI is really good, but it's just like, you need to brace for impact when it comes to this game, because it's quite a big jump.
do you know what as well? I would say, from a games industry point of view, I'd encourage anyone in the industry who works on design of games and UX, so not just UX, but gameplay design as well, to put a number of hours into this, to put 40 or 50 hours of gameplay into this, and ask yourself, how did they manage to do this with so many restrictions, technically, aesthetically? They were restricted in every way, because creative restriction's a brilliant thing. Sometimes we've got too many options, and we try and throw everything at you and blow you away, and it ends up being a bit boring. This is never boring. Frustrating, yes, but never boring.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm going to put you on the spot with a question, Chris. It's not from the audience. It's just something I was wondering. And if we can't answer it, we'll just cut it out. Do you think there's anything that was made in Elite, that was like programmed in or designed in, that current games are like still using that trick or still using something they did? Like a lesson that's been learnt from back then? Yeah,
and it's always that difficult thing of saying that the genealogy of that idea all started here, because they all have borrowed it. There's plenty of references as to games that they refer to. I think that HUD, that HUD still pretty much exists in every game that tries to do that multi-dimensional, navigation. And you said it earlier, they absolutely nailed it. Even putting the little flag on the top of it immediately gives your head a cue. And it shouldn't be able to do it with that, with so few pixels. It should be, I can never use that, and it doesn't really work. So I think those things for definite. The other piece is the balance that Joe talked about. If you start over trading, the pricing will come down. I've seen that in so many other things. So yeah, over the years, and you wonder if it's fathered, grandfathered, great grandfathered. There's probably like 5 generations on in certain games. We've said it. No Man's Sky is elite. Just dressed up with lots of funny animals in it as well.
Yeah, and that stuff is so elegant, because there's a lot of games that I think haven't learned that lesson, and if there was an exploit like that, eventually it would just come up and say, like, you can't land here, or you can't trade it, whereas this is a solution that mirrors the real world, and it's within the fiction. Like, that is the way the market would react. Like, it's solving a gameplay issue of how do you force players to explore and keep venturing out into space, but doing it in an real world way. And there's plenty of games I've played where there was obviously a problem where too many players were playing in a certain way, and they brute forced a solution and just said nope, like, and just take that away from you. Even like in some games where they want you to play online all the time, and it'd be like you earn more experience playing online compared to playing offline and stuff. And it's like, that's such an unelegant solution to that problem. Whereas in this game, I can't think of anything. I can't see a solution that they use duct tape rather than clever thought.
And I think you'll also see. I mean, in some things that we're working on at 4J right now, we're not working on. I didn't pick this because we've got a space trading game coming out next month, folks. Absolutely not.
We thought you were going to announce it here. We thought we were going to get the big exclusive.
But there are, that whole. We really believe in that suspension of disbelief. I mean, Joe mentioned it. Yeah, I was exactly the same as you, Joe. I was really disappointed when Starfield went to a loading screen. I'm like, what? Really, and I know they found a technical hurdle. From their point of view, this was the only way through it for the moment, and it was a reasonable compromise. But we're still designing games where we're saying, no, we want to give people an experience that feels seamless. That when they come into our game, we don't break the magic. And I think we've been.
Can I give a great example of that for like the perfect one for a 4J's version of Minecraft is giving you the map. And the map in it is like you start off with it and you look down and it has your coordinates so for where you are in the world, because everyone playing on PC, they'd press I think F5 or whatever, and it would come up with all the debug information, but it would include your coordinates, and that was what everyone used. So people would be playing the Minecraft in the world with a bunch of ugly text on the screen, and then in the console editions it did it on a map, and then in later versions that were out on console, they removed that. And then everyone complained, and so they added it in an option where you can turn it on, and once again, it's just text on screen in an ugly box. And so I think that's probably a way to kind of demonstrate, I guess, the 4J philosophy and what I appreciated so much on those versions of the game. No, let's do an elegant solution in world that makes sense.
Yeah, and thank you for that, because I think that's something that sometimes it looks like a small thing, but it might take a lot of work and effort to design it that way. Similarly, the other thing I'd point to on Elite, and one of the reasons I put it up there as one of the best games of all time, its performance is brilliant. Like, they do all of this remarkable stuff, and it keeps a consistent frame rate. I don't know, if I was going to guess the frame rate, it's probably like 15 frames a second, maybe a bit more. It's not super, super quick, but that would, that's not surprising. But it's consistent, so you just accept it. You never go, oh, it's suddenly stuttering and it's doing it. Whereas again, there's been a trend recently with a lot of games, and Minecraft is one of them. It's like, the performance doesn't really matter because players know what's going on and they'll accept it. But to me, it does matter. To me, when you then compare that with something that runs really smoothly and you've suspended disbelief, you forget you're in a game. You accept it. But when somebody shakes you back out of that and says, "Oh, I'm suddenly doing this and you can't," and I'm getting frustrated with it, then the spell's broken. So, that's another reason I keep coming back to this game, because it did that job brilliantly of engaging me, never letting me go. Very rarely, I've seen it crash, of course I have, but very rarely did it crash. It kind of, because that would be frustrating. I'm just about to deliver my perfect candle.
Oh no!
Boom. Yeah. No.
What was a crash like on the BBC Micro? What happened when the game crashed? I'm just curious.
Well, obviously you had like complete freeze. You'd have that, but you'd also get like a hard reboot. It would just kind of suddenly go doof and come back into the OS would come up, and obviously it was a command line OS. It wasn't a windowed OS, so you just have the little arrow flashing at you, and you'd be smashing the keyboard. Don't do this to me.
And were you playing on a joystick back in the day, or was it just keyboard?
No, you could get a joystick, but if you're playing Elite, if you're hardcore Elite, you didn't play Elite on a joystick. You play Elite on a keyboard.
Or a NES controller.
Yeah, or in a browser on your Mac of an emulator version. What are those three methods? That's the way the hardcore do it.
So I'll give you my fun story from with the emulator. Coming back to this, I was playing it the other night, and I had a couple other windows open. I've got a big giant screen, so I was like, okay, I've got it up here and I'm playing it, and I just put it on full speed. I was heading for the space station, and I was like doing some email on the side. I was like, yeah, I'll come back to it, if something goes on. And then I looked, and I hadn't looked around. I looked and went, oh my god, I'm almost at the planet. Oh, quick, fly! And I put my hands on the keys, and it wouldn't work. I'd forgotten to press the mouse into the emulator. And I was like, no! And it smashed into the planet and killed me. So, yeah, not so good. That didn't happen on the BBC.
Shall we put it on the list? Is it time?
Yeah, let's rank it. All right, before we plonk it in, is there before it docks in whatever slot it's going to end up in? Have you any thoughts on our list? Is there any games that you know that seem out of place? I know there's an obscure and wide selection of games, so I wouldn't expect you to have played most of them, but any that stand out?
Well, by the way, I followed your Humanity series. I hadn't played it until you guys started playing it. It's great. Brilliant. Really, really loved it.
Thanks.
Yeah, there's pretty much everything that I know well. I'm going, I'd agree with that. I'd agree with that. I mean, it's interesting when you're talking about all time. This is where I'd be advocating for Elite. I look through that list. And not all of them, to me, have a place in an all-time amazing list. They're decent games, but not not. They didn't change things. They didn't, with something like Half-Life Alyx, that deserves a great place on the list. It's the first thing to appear in VR that I thought, wait a minute, this has changed my brain in terms of what I think a VR game can be, because up to that point I was like, yeah, nobody's ever going to do anything decent in this. And then suddenly they did. Right in the middle of your list, like Super Metroid, incredible. In its genre, I think everyone at the time was a massive fan, and it's gone on to influence so much. So there's lots of that. But then it's interesting. Pikmin 4 sitting at 15. It's a great game. It's really, really good. But it's just another Pikmin. It's a better balanced Pikmin. It's there.
Just to be clear, so for the list, the way we do it is so we're not trying to construct this is the list of greatest games of all time. It's it's like personal favorites. It's completely. We're not trying to be objective or like games like Doom is up at number 8. It's not up at number 8 because it, popularized the FPS genre and was a technical marvel. It's up there because it was really fun when we played it last year. Like that's the reason it's there. So there's a lot of there's games that we know, oh, this game is better than that game, but I just prefer this style of game more, so it's higher. So, you look at a game like Rogue, which is, the only game which is older than Elite, all the way down at 46. Like, we appreciate what it did. It, founded the roguelike genre and was revolutionary in its time. But we were evaluating it as in playing it today. So we do kind of bear in mind influence and legacy, but mostly we are just doing, how much did we enjoy it? So just to prepare you, Chris,
okay, just
before we put Elite on the list.
I am also, let me mention that I'm firmly on the legacy side. I'm the one that's like, Doom needs to be up this high. I basically said that every game since Doom is Doom, and everything has come from that. So I was like, it needs to be at number 8. Whereas Joe's like, yeah, but if Doom came out the same day as Halo, no one would look at Doom. was your exact words. So just be ready for that. Yeah. Okay. But before we do anything else, we did do Alien Isolation last. It was the last game we covered. And at the time, neither of us had finished it. I've since finished it, and it's at 37, and I think it needs to move up. Its highs are very high, and it is long, but it's not so bad. I actually think
you mentioned to me that you were saying about how it's too long, and now you've played even more of it.
But I liked it. I really enjoyed it. I mean, I sat there and played the whole thing, and I'm going to play the DLC as well. And I think we did it dirty by putting it at 37. I think it's more of a 21, maybe 15 to 20.
That's a big job.
Yeah, we did it dirty. Alien Isolation is amazing. It's a really, really good game. Have you played it, Chris?
No, I've never played Alien Isolation.
Set in space, you'd love it.
I assumed that you'd have played it. I was like, oh yeah, Chris would have played it. It's in space, but you haven't.
No.
So what always happens is me and Ollie would debate, and we'll get it onto a position, and I'll be happy, and Ollie won't. And then he'll wait until there's a guest on for reinforcements because I have weird taste in games, and so he was hoping for backup with you, I think.
Yeah, I was hoping for backup.
Right?
Can we put it up?
Yeah. I mean, if you really like it, I'll give you. I mean, not to 21 though. Not to 21.
I mean, I'm a fan of Alien now. I'd never even seen it. I'm now a fan of Alien because of Alien Isolation.
So what about if we do 33? So it'd be one under Phoenix Wright, one above Warcraft 2, and then maybe we'll come back in a couple of weeks and we'll look at it again and we see how we feel then.
Yep, that's fine by me. It's had a big jump.
There you go. That was a freebie. That was a freebie. So that's Alien Isolation up from 37 up to 33.
Yeah.
Anyway, what we came here to do. So we had a mini break between here, and while you were away, Chris, Ollie was like, you got to go first. I don't want to go first here. You say where you'd put it first. So I think Ollie's setting me up to be the villain here. So yes, look. So speaking of Rogue, I would put it above Rogue. I enjoyed it more than Rogue. I was surprised at how I was excited. I knew about the trading and the exploration. I didn't realize how active the combat would be, and just how that just feels great. Like the controlling in 3D space and the dogfights were genuinely intense and exciting. And I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting mainly to be looking at data sheets and spreadsheets and stuff. I enjoyed it more than World of Warcraft, but I didn't like that. I enjoyed it. I would probably go and put it at number 44, which for audio listeners would put it one under Onimusha and then one above Max Payne 3 is where I would put it.
Oh, okay. I would actually put it higher than you.
Okay. Where would you go?
I was thinking The Dig, number 40. Because that was a game that I was like, oh god, this is going to be really old and I'm going to struggle with this. And then I ended up quite liking it. And I feel like this is the same, where I'm like, actually, it is kind of playable in 2023. It is pretty good. And I didn't hate it. And it's quite cool to look back. Like, I will admit I had more fun looking up researching this game than I did actually playing it. But I think 40 is fine. 39, 40. I mean, it can go above BioShock 2 even. So
I know you're a you enjoyed the old LucasArts adventure games, right, Chris? Did you ever come across The Dig?
Oh yeah, I played The Dig, and The Dig. I don't think The Dig was their best work. I think The Dig was decent, but it's not their best work. And this is not my gift. But I think Ollie's argument is, I totally get what you're trying to do with the list and kind of and I absolutely see. And one of the reasons I picked it was I think it's a proper representation of what games were like at the time and. As a game player, what you went in. So playing it in 23, I think your comments have all been really fair about it's used to experiences now. Well, this would not stand up as an experience now, and I think that's right. But it was so two sides. One, and I know this isn't how you're judging it. It was so advanced in its time that it was kind of mind-blowingly opened the door for a whole bunch of things. and did them brilliantly. And you actually said it, Joe. It's still, in such a simple way, the core Twitch gameplay, the space combat gameplay, when you get into it, it's still brilliant. So to me, of course it doesn't deserve to be top 10, given what our industry's put out over the last 40 or 50 years. There's a lot, there's loads up there that do it. But I think within the top 40 is a nice place for it to be.
That's good.
Okay.
I'm happy with that.
So
I mean, consider Rogue was 1 year previous. How different those games are. Like Rogue was like unbelievably basic compared to this.
Yeah.
This was like, I mean, Rogue was it was text. It was almost nothing.
Yeah, I mean, you're controlling a little at key going around the screen. Yeah. But still really impressive. Oh man, I mean, Chris is hard to argue with, isn't he? He's the passion is seeping out of my monitor. I could just see it from him. Okay, we'll put it in top 40 at number 40, which means it'd be one above The Dig, putting it one underneath BioShock 2. And then obviously the Dig would be pushed out of the top 40 down to 41.
How about this? We put The Dig in 39 and put BioShock 2 in 41.
I mean, I want BioShock 2 way higher than it is already. Like you won to get BioShock 2 that low. Then again, okay. I do have such warm when I think of The Dig. Like I think of the art and the music. I think about it all the time. Yeah. And I think compared to the art and stuff from BioShock 2, but I also remember the puzzles in the Dig, and as Chris said, they went a little bit too obscure. I think because it was set on an alien planet and there was not much grounding it. I think it was very, very challenging, and kind of what we were talking about earlier with Elite. Like I think this is actually a game that could have done with a bit of focus testing and seeing what someone that doesn't know the solution to the puzzles, how they would approach it.
I mean, The Dig is the only LucasArts game I've ever played.
Really?
Yeah, and I played it almost entirely with a guide open, so I was kind of just there for the ride.
So have you never played any of the Monkey Island games?
I played about 10 minutes of one of them at Joe's, and I think we'd had a few beers, and maybe it wasn't the right moment for me to be trapped in a cell.
Do you remember? Oh, trapped in a cell. Was it in a boat? Was it Monkey Island 3?
Yeah, and then there's like a skeleton outside the window, and you like speak to him.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's cursed. What's your favourite old LucasArts adventure game? I know we're getting very off topic, Chris, and we've kept you for a long time, but I have to know.
Probably with Chuck's Revenge, I think. Yeah. I mean, I've loved them all. Actually, the Indiana Jones adventures are worth going back and playing. Okay. They were done really brilliantly as well, but yeah, it probably with Chuck's Revenge.
Yeah, cool, awesome. Yeah, I'm a big Monkey Island fan. For Full Throttle's my favourite overall. I just love that story. I know that's a much more recent one. That's a really cool one. Anyway, as I said, getting very off topic here. So congratulations to Elite. Managed to swoop down into top 40. It was looking a little bit shaky there for a bit. It wasn't quite lined up on the letterbox in the station, but it managed to scrape its way in and make the landing. And thank you so much, Chris, for choosing this game. As I expected, it was a really interesting conversation, and that's what our goal is here. It's much more about, we're trying to pick as wildly different games as we can to kind of force ourselves to play games that we wouldn't otherwise. And I can say with 100% certainty, Ollie and I were not going to play this game otherwise. But, you gave us a reason to sit down, learn it, understand it, I'd download the manual on my iPad and have all of the exchange rates and all of the information. And it was such a unique experience. So, thank you so much for that, Chris.
No, brilliant. Thanks for having me on. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It's always great to talk to you anyway, but great to talk games with you. With like this, it'd be amazing.
Yeah, we love it.
Thanks so much.
Do you want to mention, Ollie, what games we have coming up in the future?
Yes, I do. I also just want to quickly say that another thing I really like doing on the podcast is like not being normies. Joe's a bit of a normie and he picks normie games, but like the fact that we're doing Elite is really cool. So I feel like I've got a bit more gamer cred now because I can say like, oh yeah, I actually played Elite for like 4 or 5 hours. So anyway, coming up, we did have Survival Kids, which, to be fair, is not a normie game. It was a strange one, but we've actually moved it because instead we are going to be playing Alan Wake 2, which only just came out. That will be on the 17th of November. And then on the 1st of December, we have Survival Kids, which is the Game Boy Color game. One of the first ever survival games. So we're going to be playing that. Yep. And I think that's actually the only things we have planned, because in December, we always do a Christmas quiz. So we'll be doing that again. And then Game of the Year. And they'll be coming out either way around. We're not sure yet. So that's what we have coming up.
So is it controversial that you're doing Alan Wake 2 when you've done Alan Wake already?
I think it's an interesting comparison, because they are very different, I think. But I don't want to say anything more, because we're obviously covering it. So
yeah.
We did Last of Us 1 and 2 before as well, which is like kind of a shame. We've done 2 survival horrors, or horror games.
Yeah, but they were both selected by guests quite close together, both Last of Us games. So it kind of worked out quite nice doing. Yeah, so we tend to not do games in the same series, but it is such a gap between these two games, and we just did the original Alan Wake quite recently. It's actually going to be quite a fun comparison, hopefully. So that's what I'm busy playing through at the moment. I also want to say big thank you to all of our recent people that have joined the channel and joined Patreon. There's been a big influx of people recently. So if you're new here, hopefully you enjoyed this podcast, and thanks for checking us out.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone. So yeah, we have Patreon, which is patreon.com/the bonus points, where we have a Discord. Everyone always comments and says, I wish you guys had a Discord. And I have to reply and be like, we do, it's here. But yeah, patreon.com/the bonus points. You can join that. It has a free trial as well. So that's pretty good.
And Chris, is there anything you want to shout out or plug before you go?
Well, I mean, obviously, if you've not tried my T-shirt, Manic Mechanics, there we go, Joe. Delighted to see. We've got our Spooky Halloween DLC available at the moment. And yeah, if you've not tried that, it's a great co-op, couch co-op game. I would have picked it, but that definitely would have been marking my own homework.
Yeah. And any critical points you made would have been thrown out the window. We played Manic Mechanics together around yours.
We did.
Before it was officially released.
Don't tell him.
I didn't steal the game. This wasn't like what they're doing in Scotland, where they're stealing all of the computers. This was
the back of the factory, £10.
Yeah.
We were not stealing them. They were going to be thrown out because they were damaged.
Of
okay,
course.
Yeah,
okay. Absolutely. I think enough time has passed. You're in the clear here now for back in the day. So yeah, once again, a huge thank you to Chris for joining us in this podcast. It has been a delight. We will see all of you back here again in 2 weeks for Alan Wake 2. But apart from that, cheers for watching, and we will see you later. Bye.
Cheers, bye.